Elon Musk promised maximum transparency with his Department of Government Efficiency, as they call it. And so far, it's been anything but a lot of misrepresentations, obfuscation, removal of formerly publicly available information. And fortunately, here during Sunshine Week, we have some accountability for that. We are joined today by Nikhel, the Deputy Chief Counsel at the stalwart Court Transparency and Ethics and Accountability Organization, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, better known as CREW. Nikhel, you guys have brought a Freedom of Information Act complaint to, first define that DOGE, the recalibrated former U.S. Digital service, is subject indeed to the Freedom of Information Act, and got a really favorable order last week, winning a preliminary injunction. Congratulations on that, first and foremost. Thank you for your work and for joining us here today. I was hoping you could get us up to speed on, what the legal question was in this case, or, obviously it's an ongoing case, but in this preliminary injunction ruling you won last week, why it's so important that we have public access to what is happening at DOGE.
Sure. And thank you, Alex, for having me here today. So this lawsuit was seeking to bring transparency to DOGE, which, as you noted, has operated largely in secret. It has not complied with the primary federal transparency law that applies to other government agencies, the Freedom of Information Act. And what this case sought to do was to get a court ruling confirming that this new entity, the U.S. DOGE service, which was formerly the U.S. Digital Service, is in fact subject to FOIA. And the test that the courts have used in determining whether units of the executive office of the president are subject to FOIA is whether the office is exercising substantial independent authority outside of the White House. In other words, if the entity is just advising and assisting the president, then they are not subject to FOIA. But if the office is doing something more significant across the government in a way that could directly affect Americans in real and palpable ways, then those entities should be subject to the transparency and accountability mechanisms of FOIA, the Administrative Procedure Act, the Privacy Act, and other statutes that apply to agencies as a check on executive abuse. And so what we were seeking was confirmation from the court that, yes, this newly created entity is operating with substantial authority outside of the White House and is, whether it's cutting billions of dollars in federal contracts, engaging in mass firings across the executive branch, or taking any other host of other significant actions. And so that the agency, this de facto agency, I should say, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And that is exactly what the court held in its decision.
It's interesting. I think back to the work I did. We were talking before the show started. I worked in an oversight role in the Senate Judiciary Committee. We were always trying to use congressional oversight tools during the first Trump administration to get at important government records. Of course, Congress and the Supreme Court, John Roberts, in a sort of sweeping opinion in the Mazars case, made clear how important congressional oversight authority is. But from our perspective, given the stonewalling we were facing from the Trump administration and all of their agencies, the external FOIA tool was actually perhaps more effective in actually producing the documents or the information that it was important for the public to know about. And here we are, at the dawn of this completely new paradigm in terms of government accountability with Trump and Musk taking the reins. Why is it so important that groups like CREW, that the citizens of all stripes, anybody can file a FOIA request, journalists, have access to this important tool and that it be enforced by courts?
Well, with respect to DOGE, let's keep in mind, this is a taxpayer-funded entity. They have been apportioned over $42 million in taxpayer funds. So they are clearly doing something with that money, and the taxpayers have a right to know what they are doing with it. And when you look at what they are doing and what they have publicly claimed credit for, shutting down, illegally shutting down USAID, CFPB, and forcing their way into government buildings and even lately non-government buildings of entities that were simply established by Congress but have not, are not actual entities of the government. When you look at all of these sweeping actions that they are taking in a really lightning fast pace with no oversight, it is incredibly important that the public have as much transparency as possible. And again, as you mentioned at the top, this is something we were promised as well. We were promised that this DOGE would operate with maximum transparency. And that is simply has not been the case. Posting selective data, cherry-picked data on a website is not transparency. Selective transparency is not transparency. And so what the FOIA recognizes, this is a law that's been on the books for decades, and it reflects the judgment of Congress and the American people that when a government entity wields this type of power, that at the bare minimum, they have to open up their books and allow the sunshine in, because otherwise the public is left into the dark. And any manner of things could be happening behind closed doors without the electorate's knowledge. And the electorate, the American people, they need to have this information in order to make informed choices, to engage their elected representatives in Congress, and to make their voices heard, so that the folks who are running this organization, who are unelected officials and haven't been elected by anyone, can be appropriately held accountable by, if nothing else, the voices of the American people.
Right. It's ironic after all these years of deep state propaganda from the MAGA faction that now that they have resumed control of the executive branch, they are almost like systematizing and doing everything they can to create their own deep state and take all the power away from the people. And, I think it's really important what you reminded folks of, which is that this is a law, right? And this is not sort of at the discretion of agencies to follow. Of course, there are these legal questions. I want to get a little bit more into that and the questions in this PI, because I'm really curious to know what DOGE actually argued, because it seems fairly straightforward. But you shouldn't have to necessarily fight through litigation to get this information. The standard order of procedure is that you make a request and they produce the information. Can you give us a little bit of the backstory in terms of the requests for these records? And then what were some of those arguments that the DOGE folks advanced in terms of trying to exempt themselves wholly from this transparency law?
Sure. Well, the primary argument has been that DOGE does not do anything other than advise and assist the president and make recommendations to agencies. As we presented in court in our motion, which the court granted, the public record points decidedly in the opposite direction. It shows that DOGE has been wielding inordinate and unprecedented control over every executive branch agency. And that is both what they have done in practice and also what is in the executive orders that formally charter DOGE.
They're bragging about this. This is like their whole thing.
Yes. And so what you have is, you have their characterization of what this entity is supposed to be doing. And then what you have is reality, what we're all seeing with our eyes and hearing with our ears. And it's there's a stark contrast between what they are saying in court and what is actually happening. And I think if you look at the judge's opinion in this case, he detailed extensively both the executive orders, what they say, what they actually charge this new entity with doing, what President Trump and Mr. Musk have said about what DOGE is doing, and what their reported actions have been. Those are the three sort of sources of information that he looked to. And so, they can say that this is simply an advisory body. They can say that they have no authority outside of the White House, but there is an extensive public record that really conflicts with that account. And the judge saw through that and put that in his opinion. And I think it's noteworthy, actually, that the government did not actually put in any evidence in opposition to our preliminary injunction motion. They actually took the position that our motion failed on so many other grounds that they didn't even need to brief the issue, address the issue of whether they're an agency subject to FOIA. And then they lost. And so now they've actually filed a motion to reconsider the judge's ruling because they said, oh, hold on. No, we want to put in evidence now. Our position is that it's too little too late. They had an opportunity to brief that issue and they chose not to do it. But even if they did brief this issue, we think the judge's opinion stands and that the record speaks for itself.
Yeah, so interesting. So, okay, so I wanted to get into this a little bit. So, what exactly was the relief you obtained beyond the very important decision from the court that yes, DOGE is susceptible to FOIA? You can use FOIA to get public information records out of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. What did they actually have to do? And you mentioned this motion for reconsideration they filed. What's the state of play right now? I know there's a deadline coming up right around the time this video will air.
Sure. So in addition to, DOGE had refused to accept our request at all because the court held that it is subject to FOIA. In the first instance, they have to accept the request. They have to process the request. Tomorrow, March 20th, they have to provide crew an estimate of the volume of records that they identified that are relevant to our request. And then on March 27th, under the court's order, they have to propose jointly with us, scheduled to the court for expedited processing and release of these records. And to those folks who might say, well, that's a really long time. Anybody who knows anything about FOIA litigation knows that is lightning fast. That is much faster than the normal process. It can take sometimes upwards of years, even in litigation, to obtain documents from the government through FOIA. And so what the court is saying here is, I want to speed this up, and this needs to happen as soon as possible. And so the government does have the ability to appeal these rulings, and it may very well do so. But under the current schedule, we could be getting documents as soon as a matter of weeks.
And they do have to preserve the documents. They can't be, at least according to the law in this order, destroying the documents. This is just so important. We talk a lot on the show about the limitations of the courts as a guardrail on democracy. But I think this, the getting into the weeds with somebody like you who's on the front lines litigating this stuff against this type of stonewalling, against this type of avoidance of applicable law that we are seeing, not just from DOGE, but across the Trump administration. It's so important. Would really commend folks, check out Crew's work, support their vitally important accountability and transparency efforts. Nikhel, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel here at Legal AF on the Midas Touch Network. We are Court Accountability Action on Tilted Scale at Substack at Tilted Scales. Make sure you check that out. We have a new piece out on John Roberts' leopards eating their faces moment with the impeachment threats that are starting to be thrown at lower court judges that are handing down rulings just like this one that Judge Cooper handed out. And we're kind of heading toward this real constitutional conflagration and conflict that it's really important that folks track closely, stay informed about, tell their communities about. So really grateful to have you here, Nikhel, for all your work, and to this audience for tuning in and staying informed. Until next time.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.